What up, Coordination? On the pod today, I've got Stephen Reid, who is a facilitator, coach, and Ruby Python developer that is working with me on some of the Metacrisis stuff that we've been doing on this podcast. So to catch you up, we've done a few episodes with a philosopher thinker from the Consilience Project named Daniel Schmachtenberger that has been thinking about this thing called the Metacrisis, which is like the crisis underneath all crises. AI alignment, bioterrorism, nuclear disarmament, climate change, biodiversity collapse. This thinker, Daniel Schmachtenberger, that we've been working with, thinks that there's one crisis that underlies all of those crises. If we could look at the generator functions of existential risk, what are the ways in which we might solve them? So basically, we've done 3 episodes with Daniel on the podcast about the Metacrisis, about ways that you could address the Metacrisis. And then we launched this thing called Metacrisis DAO about 2 or 3 months ago on the GreenPilled podcast. So Metacrisis.xyz has been a forum in which thinkers who care about the Metacrisis and want to try to solve it can connect with each other and hopefully launch DAOs or Web3 projects that are addressing the Metacrisis from there. So a place for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together and work on the most important problems of our day is the idea. But people kept asking us, hey, when governance, when token? Because it's called Metacrisis DAO. And so Stephen and I are doing this episode to highlight the, first, we're going to rename MetaCrisisDAO.com to Metacrisis.xyz. There will be forum.metacrisis.xyz where people can connect. And then there'll also be wiki.metacrisis.xyz where people can build knowledge graphs and accumulate knowledge from there. So first note, renaming MetaCrisisDAO.com to Metacrisis.xyz to make it clear, no token, no governance structure. Other people can launch DAOs and tokens and governance structures, but that's not something that Stephen and I are doing. And then we spend the rest of the episode focusing on the prompts that Daniel has given us about how we might address the Metacrisis with Web3, which is the cool work that I would like to focus on when we do fund the work coming out of Metacrisis.xyz in an upcoming quadratic funding round with Gitcoin, Alpha Leak. We're going to be doing a quadratic funding round for the Metacrisis. Then that's the stuff that I'm going to be funding. So basically, how do we red team and blue team how Web3 technologies relate to the Metacrisis? How could Web3 tech make various aspects of the Metacrisis worse? And how could Web3 tech make various aspects of the Metacrisis addressed? So that's what we're spending this episode on. A few administrative updates about the Metacrisis.xyz community, and then also talking about these prompts from Daniel and some of the work that Stephen has done on them. So Stephen is just a polymath. He's so smart. He's so genuine in his wanting to solve this problem. So I've been really enjoying working with him on the Metacrisis.xyz project. And I think that you're really going to enjoy this episode. So before we get into the episode with Stephen, I just want to say I will be doing a handful of episodes about Metacrisis stuff with people who have been studying it in and out of Web3. So if you have a suggestion for someone that I should have on the podcast, please DM me. I'm twitter.com/Owaki. And Stephen will just be the first of many that we talk about the Metacrisis with. So without further ado, I give you Stephen Reid. Enjoy, Coordination.
Working in Web3 is awesome, but working outside of the typical W-2 employee structure is a deal breaker for so many. OPOLIS is helping the self-sovereign worker focus on what they do best, their work. Tax time is coming up. OPOLIS helps professionalize your business by helping you form an entity, generate proof of employment through pay stubs, and receive a W-2 at the end of the tax year. Are you self-employed and forced to spend money on expensive healthcare insurance with limited coverage? OPOLIS leverages group buying power through a community employment co-op, helping you save 20 to 50% on high-quality, affordable healthcare options through Cigna. And finally, OPOLIS's member owners share in OPOLIS's success and profits based on their work token holdings. You must be authorized to work inside the United States and select Canadian provinces to receive OPOLIS's benefits. Book a 30-minute free consultation with OPOLIS's experts and join OPOLIS by March 31st, 2023 to get 1,000 work and 1,000 bank tokens. Go to connect.opolis.co/bankless to get started. And if you're going to ETH Denver, make sure to stop by the OPOLIS booth or attend their Future of Work Summit hosted by OPOLIS. The Glow Dollar is a new stablecoin with a very special property. As the market cap of Glow goes up, extreme poverty goes down. Glow is a dollar-backed, non-profit stablecoin that creates basic income for people living in extreme poverty. Glow is basically the same business model as USDC, with yield-generating treasuries on one side and a stablecoin on Ethereum on the other. But instead of being a for-profit company, Glow is a non-profit that donates 100% of all yields from the Glow Reserve to Give Directly's basic income program. Give Directly is a charity that gives people money, no strings attached, to people living in poverty, and is a charity that Vitalik has previously donated to and supported in the past. With Glow, you can reduce poverty just by holding a stablecoin. Glow is launching in early 2023, and you can join the waitlist at glowdollar.org/greenpill. That's glodollar.org/greenpill.
Hey, Stephen, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks, Kevin. How are you?
Pretty good. Really excited to talk about all things Metacrisis, Metacrisis DAO, Metacrisis.xyz with you. So maybe you could tee us off by giving us a little bit of the history here.
Yeah, sure thing. So, of course, you had these 3 fantastic conversations with Daniel Schmachtenberger between July last year and January this year on the Metacrisis. Second one was on superstructures, and the third one was talking about the idea of a Metacrisis DAO. And the key suggestion of Daniel at the end of that third conversation was the idea of red teaming and green teaming Web3 technologies as they relate to the Metacrisis. So red teaming, how could Web3 tech actually make various aspects of the Metacrisis worse? And green teaming, how could Web3 tech actually ameliorate, make better various aspects of the Metacrisis? So you threw the forum up at metacrisis.dao.com, so people that had tuned into those episodes could start exploring those questions. And the forum has been super active. We've had over 200 users register, it's had over 10,000 views across the various posts, more than 400 posts at this point, I think, and a whole bunch of video calls. So yeah, definitely some momentum there.
Yeah, it's been fun. And so for the listeners' benefit, this episode will make more sense to you if you go back and you listen to those previous episodes. We'll have a link to those in the show notes. The Metacrisis, again, you should listen to the episodes, but basically it's this idea that climate change, biodiversity collapse, AI alignment, and a lot of different coordination failures have underlying dynamics to them that are similar. And the underlying dynamic, according to this philosopher and thinker, Daniel Schmachtenberger, who we've had on the podcast 3 times now, is that human activity leads to coordination failure. Humans uncoordinated create catastrophes. And the example here is like with climate change, through our uncoordinated activity, we externalize carbon to the environment, which creates this self-terminating effect where climate change will be a threat to life on Earth. So the answer to that in most human societies is to regulate it. But the problem with regulation is once you've given the government the ability to regulate on top of you on one thing, then you give them the ability to regulate everything around you. And so that human activity attractor is dystopias. So the first attractor of human activity, like game theoretic attractor, is coordination failure. The second attractor is dystopia. And so how can we find a third attractor, a way in which we can coordinate with each other, but with limited governance scope and decentralized coordination is kind of the idea behind the Metacrisis. I'm really reducing it down from a lot of different concepts from Daniel, but you should go listen to the previous 3 episodes with Daniel. And so yeah, the 3 episodes with Daniel were defining the Metacrisis, ways that we could address the Metacrisis. And then the third episode was about Metacrisis DAO, which was a community that a forum that was launched where people that are Web3 enthusiasts or just Metacrisis enthusiasts could talk to each other about ways that we could address the Metacrisis with Web3. So there's been an explosion of activity there, and it's been really kind of fun to participate into. But I think we maybe misnamed it a little bit, or at least I misnamed it, because it's called Metacrisis DAO, and it's not really a DAO. It's kind of a place where future DAOs that address the Metacrisis could be conceived of and generated. And so I think we're going to consider changing the name to Metacrisis.xyz. It'll be the Metacrisis Forum, and that'll make it more clear to people that we don't plan to introduce governance into this community. So yeah, Stephen, hopefully I covered that correctly. Anything you want to add there?
That was a great summary, yeah. And the forum very much has been a kind of like meeting place for people interested in the intersection of Metacrisis and Web3. It having the idea that it might have a token or governance has been a little bit unnecessarily distracting. So I think that changing the name will just help to settle that one.
So I mean, I believe that if people show up and they have a great idea for something that could address the meta crisis and they want to launch their own DAO or their own thing that has a token or an NFT or something like that, then they're more than welcome to. But each of you and I are busy with other projects and have no plans to launch another. I'm busy enough with like participating in all things Supermodular and all of our alumni like Gitcoin. And so we had no plans to make it into a DAO. And so this rename from MetaCrisisDAO.com to Metacrisis.xyz is just meant to reflect that kind of like ungovernance structure to it.
Nice. I'll also mention at this point there is a wiki that's currently at wiki.metacrisisdao.com, but will be at wiki.metacrisis.xyz, which is generated based on all of the transcripts of podcasts of Daniel Schmachtenberger and a few others. We use some nifty AI technology to like pull out all of the kind of key concepts and key phrases and generate definitions for those and backlink those using like time-stamped links to all the places where Daniel talks about those concepts. So check out that wiki if you want to kind of get up to speed with some of this content quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we've got the Metacrisis.xyz wiki, and we've got the forum, which is a place where people can connect. We've also got a Telegram channel in which people are going back and forth. And what has been the most interesting activity that you've seen in the last month or two out of this community, Stephen?
Well, I'm still really excited to get to grips with Daniel's original prompts, original suggestions, this red teaming, green teaming activity. And a group has started coming together around that kind of like content working group. It's been called so far. And I think it's to do that research properly certainly requires an amount of skill and commitment and time. But we're starting to see some interesting things come of that. For myself, I've been mainly thinking about the intersection of bioterrorism and the uncensorable quality of blockchains, and then various aspects of Web3 and nuclear disarmament. But there's a whole bunch of stuff going on the forum, not beyond simply that red teaming and green teaming. Another couple of threads that I saw recently and appreciated was dystopian and utopian fiction on this in the same area of talking about how could Web3 kind of create a utopian future in relation to like meta crisis factors. So not approaching so much from a research perspective, but a fictional one, and I think that certainly has its place as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you and I have kind of been involved in a lot of these discussions, and we're both kind of feeling like, okay, let's not worry about governance structures for this Metacrisis DAO thing. We don't even know what it is. Let's instead really study the Metacrisis. Daniel likes to say a problem well understood, or there's a quote that came up in one of the episodes, a problem well understood is half addressed. And so, if we can imagine speculative futures and we can do research on red teaming various aspects of how Web3 could contribute to the meta crisis, that's at least where my interests kind of lie. And that's not to say that someone else could launch a governance structure for something that does that also, but for me, just showing up and having the conversation and doing the research and posting it on the forum has been the most interesting thing that has come out of the conversation so far.
Yeah, for sure. And just a call out to talented researchers that are really interested in getting their teeth into some of these topics. I've personally found it really fulfilling, really interesting to really devote some time to thinking carefully about the intersection of some of these factors. And there's just a lot there, a lot of curiosity and satisfaction to be had. Yeah,
totally. And it looks like we may be funding some of that work in the near future. We'll be launching tentatively, I've got to ink the deal or whatever the the digital version of inking deals is with Gitcoin. But the idea was to run a Gitcoin grants round for Metacrisis.xyz and to fund some of the researchers that are showing up and adding value to this public good, which is understanding the metacrisis. So for the listeners who are familiar with Gitcoin grants, it's now a protocol-based way of doing quadratic funding, a crowdfunding campaign for different communities in Web3, and we're going to be demoing it, dog fooding it with Metacrisis.xyz if they decide to accept us into the April rounds. So news on that will be coming up. We've got talent, we've got momentum, and this will be adding some tokens to the mix, and I think that that'll be really interesting.
For sure, there's definitely been a real excitement about the possibility of a Metacrisis QF round on the forum, and yeah, good point to say that as far as I understand, Supermodular is open to co-sponsors for that round. So if you're an organization that understands the importance of the metacrisis and the potential for Web3 to address some of those problems, then I imagine Kevin would be interested in having a chat with regards to possible co-sponsorship of that QF round over the coming months.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Gitcoin's mission has always been about public goods and funding what matters. To me, the metacrisis matters. I want to solve some of these underlying generator dynamics, or at least address these underlying generator dynamics of the metacrisis. And so it felt like a really big opportunity to take the work that Gitcoin's been doing and to point it at one of the biggest problems or most meta problems of our age.
And it's certainly been heading in that direction. Like there's already been a climate solution or several climate solutions rounds. And this feels like a natural progression in a way, as the Web3 community kind of wakes up to the fact with the insight and assistance of people like Daniel that the climate crisis is just one example of coordination failure writ large. There are others. The promise of Web3 in a way is to actually get to that deeper layer, to actually solve the coordination problems underlying a whole class of different existential threats, of which climate change is just one. So it feels like a very sensible direction to head for me.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it and hope to see other people show up and fund that work. So with those announcements out of the way, MetacrisisDAO.com is now Metacrisis.xyz, and that we're going to be doing a quadratic funding round for Metacrisis.xyz. Maybe we could focus the rest of the episode on the most interesting prompts from Daniel and what the latest thinking is on some of them.
Yeah, sure thing. So I would boil down Daniel's prompts to really two, at least there are two that relate to research. One which I've called already this idea of red teaming. How could Web3 tech actually make various aspects of the meta crisis worse, which is of course not something that Web3 folks generally like to think about. You know, we want to think, yeah, this is awesome and this is going to make the world better. But Daniel really impressed upon us, like you have to think these things through. Even if you think you're doing something good, even if you think the tech is awesome, there are all kinds of unexpected consequences that that really can do with a bit of careful thought. And also the idea of green teaming, the part which Web3 folks are kind of happier to think about. What are the parts of the meta crisis where Web3 could actually really make things better? And I mean, this feels important to me partly because for me sometimes Web3 seems like a solution looking for a problem. That like we build all this rad tech and this code, but we're like arguably we're solving like relatively trivial matters. Whereas if Web3 folks maybe just understood there are some serious problems that the people are working on out there right now, for example, bioterrorism and nuclear disarmament and so on. Like how would it be to actually the Web3 folks that think, oh yeah, we could actually make a difference to some of these critical threats in society, and just just like raising the stakes a bit, like kind of like raising our ambitions a bit in terms of the kinds of problems that Web3 is setting out to tackle.
Yeah, totally. I have the blog post about the prompts from Daniel up on my screen, so I'll just read out how I perceive them, and then maybe we can unfurl them together. So, red team the fuck out of Web3's effects on the meta crisis. What are all the possible negative externalities, psychosocially or technologically? What are the first order effects of Web3 technologies and working for protocols, second order, third order, etc.? the other prompts that I have here is by vertical topic area, existential risk, weaponized drones, grid fragility, biodiversity collapse, etc. Does Web3 enable solutions that are not currently existing? What are the hardest problems out there? And is there anything this technology enables? And then the third one I have here is by horizontal areas. So things like generator functions. Can we address perverse incentives writ large, commenting writ large, internalizing externalities, turning theories of trade-offs into synergistic satisfiers? So those are the prompts that I've got written from that episode with Daniel, and where I would like to focus. I'm only one node in this network, but in many ways one of the OG nodes. That's where I would like to focus a lot of the discussions, and that's where I'll be contributing my quadratic funding contributions towards in this upcoming quadratic funding round.
And just to say how our two descriptions of that map. So I rolled your second and third points into the idea of green teaming, but yeah, you can kind of green team more on the horizontals or the kind of general problem areas of the meta crisis, or on the specific or so-called vertical problems of the meta crisis. But it has a similar flavor of how can Web3 tech actually help here?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, the reductionist, I guess, way of having these prompts are: what are the ways in which Web3 technology can help address the meta crisis, whether in vertical or horizontal topic area? And then the red team is: in what ways does it make it worse? And so thinking adversarially and optimistically, we can kind of boil everything else in the episode down into those two categories.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done on the Metacrisis forum is do a kind of first pass of red teaming and green teaming using a fantastic plugin, GPT for Sheets. So we created a sheet where we had all of the different or different Web3 technologies as the rows of this sheet, ranging from like quite abstract ones, things like simply decentralization and immutability, to very specific things like quadratic voting and joke race and holographic consensus and so on. Those are the rows of the sheet, and then the columns were all of the different metacrisis problems, if you like. So again, ranging from like very abstract ones from perverse incentives and multipolar traps to very specific things like biosecurity and nuclear weapons. So with this 2D grid of Web3 tech and metacrisis problems, we then created two sheets, one red team sheet and one green team sheet, where on one of the sheets we're saying, how does that intersection of any two of those things, how does the Web3 tech make that thing worse? And on the other sheet it's saying, take that intersection of any Web3 tech with any metacrisis issue, how can Web3 tech actually make that thing better? And it's, as we know, GPT sort of isn't always on the mark. Probably like 50% of that sheet was garbage, but like the other 50% was actually quite helpful just in stimulating the imagination. And the task, as I see it from now, is kind of take those AI generated prompts as a starting point, but then we need like talented human researchers to go and do a deep dive on those topics. And so the two topics that so far that I've done a deep dive on, as I mentioned, one was bioterrorism and the other was nuclear disarmament.
Yeah, amazing. So we're going breadth first, and then we can go depth first from there and how we traverse this problem space. So is there anything else to say about the depth first stuff, or should we dive into go deep on one of them?
Well, just to say, like, if I'm sure there is more that can be done at with that wide perspective. So if it might be that some folks feel really passionate about that kind of, using AI, for example, to help us try to get some insight of this problem at the broadest levels. Yeah. So yeah, if people have those kind of skills or interests, then absolutely get involved in Metacrisis.xyz.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think in the way that Daniel framed his prompt by talking about vertical topic area and then also horizontal area, to me almost lends itself to just like, oh, there's a taxonomy here. And if someone really wanted to own the creation of that taxonomy, then I think that would be massively valuable work to the whole to the whole initiative. It's almost like, in Zelda or a video game where you find the map and then you always know where you are on the mini map from there. If someone wanted to take that breadth first work and run with it, that would be a grant that I would support in the upcoming round.
And just to say, I think we've got plenty of the raw materials there. I would particularly point to the Metacrisis.xyz wiki, where a whole load of kind of analysis is done of Daniel's podcast appearances and the kinds of problems that he's spoken about in the past. And from the Web3 side, a site that I found really useful was let me remind myself. It was on the Supermodular site. It is the what's going on here? Okay, the coordination mechanisms mini site of the Supermodular site. This has, I think, 50 or so different coordination mechanisms, that many of which he spoke about in the episode with Griff Green. So that would be another great episode for folks to listen to, actually, if they're interested in getting involved in this. By the time you've listened to Griff and Kevin talk about like this whole box of possible Web3 solution tech, and you've heard Daniel speak about the problem landscape, it's a case of, okay, like, where do these things meet, and how can we actually employ that tech in service of making the meta crisis less bad.
We will put a link to that resource as well in the show notes. That's supermodular.xyz/coordination-mechanisms, just a little taxonomy of different coordination mechanisms that exist out there.
Nice. Okay, so shall we dive a little bit deeper into one or a couple of these the topics that I mentioned then?
Yeah, let's do it. Which one should we start with?
Since it's an example that Daniel has mentioned a few times, let's go with the research on bioterrorism, tabletop DNA printers, and uncensorable blockchains. And what Daniel has said on a couple of occasions of, like, it could be really bad if someone puts pathogenic DNA on an uncensorable blockchain in the era of tabletop DNA printers. That is to say, DNA printers where you can kind of just download genetic code off the internet and like kind of plug it into this machine, and it just like prints off copies of a virus or something like this. Like that obviously sounds like could be really bad news.
I'll just if you don't mind, I'll just interject there. One thing that I didn't cover in my reductionist definition of the meta crisis at the top is the compounding existential risk coming out of technology. So, if the meta crisis 1,000 years ago, the worst that we'd be able to do is kind of shoot swords or use swords or bows and arrows to kill each other. 10,000 years ago, it was maybe sticks and stones. And but as you start to get more towards modern day, you get cannons, you get tanks, you get nuclear arms. And then you get tabletop DNA printers and AIs that everyone has. And so how do you control the coordination failure for nuclear arms is different if 6 countries across the world have nukes versus everyone in the world has a nuke in their pocket. And so that's kind of like one of the generator dynamics of existential risk, is the idea, the compounding destructional capacity that everyday people could have. And like, just statistically, if you've got 300 million people in a country, one of them is going to be crazy enough to want to blow everyone else up. And how do you regulate that capacity? So that's one of the generator dynamics underneath the meta crisis. And I just wanted to say that as we're talking about tabletop DNA printers, that's the dynamic that Daniel, I think, is like most interested in, not to speak for him, but exactly. From my perception.
There is a shift happening, as I understand it. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert in this area by any means, that where up until now, there's been a relatively small number of labs that are actually capable of like synthesizing pathogenic, bugs at scale, and that's been quite expensive to do. And we're transitioning to an era, where it's very easy and it's very cheap for anyone to do that. So whereas previously it might have been okay to kind of just regulate, keep an eye on a handful of labs, it's now becoming a much more challenging problem. But the specific research question that I was interested in is does the uncensorable quality of blockchains make this problem worse? So what I'm not trying to do is to say like, oh, this isn't a problem. Like, I think it is a problem. But from the research that I did, I came to the conclusion that blockchains don't make this problem any worse. And the reason for that, is that there is already a huge amount of pathogenic DNA and genetic code sequences out there available on the ClearNet. Now, I didn't realize this myself. I don't know to what extent Daniel realizes this or has done research on this, but it's very straightforward to find, say, the like kind of genetic code for a deadly virus like Ebola through just minutes of googling, and the availability of pathogenic genetic code is already so widespread on the ClearNet. I cannot personally see a scenario where it being also now available on blockchains would make the problem any worse. I guess it's possible to envisage a scenario where governments instruct everyone that's hosting pathogenic DNA on the ClearNet to take those sites down and to remove that genetic code from the ClearNet. And then it maybe will become a more interesting question about whether that code becomes available on blockchains. But for as long as it is so widely available through other means, I can't see it being an issue being on blockchains as well. Which led me to think that the level at which probably we're going to need to tackle this for the time being is on the availability of the DNA printers themselves, and doing our best to actually regulate access to those in the way that many countries in the world, at least, have very strong regulations on firearms. It was a super interesting topic to dive into for a day.
Yeah, it's sort of kind of I mean, it could be its whole own episode of maybe not the GreenPilled podcast, because we're more focused on Web3 and regen stuff, but what are the existential the new technologies that will be in the hands of everyone by the year, I don't know, let's call it 2050, and how do we deal with the fact that there's tabletop DNA printers or an AI in your pocket that's 1,000 times smarter than you, that's negotiating with other AIs, and I think it's quite interesting. So anything else to say about that study?
No, I think not, other than I was kind of in some sense pleasantly surprised in that example, because it can sound scary, like what if pathogenic DNA gets on the blockchain, and actually with a bit of thought you realize, well, in this case at least, it doesn't sound like it doesn't seem so scary, after a bit of research. But I expect we'll be surprised in various ways from people doing this research thoroughly. Sometimes it will turn out the conclusion will be, actually, I don't think this is as serious a problem as we thought. And other times we'll do the research and very probably be like, oh shit, this is a much bigger problem than we thought. But we're not going to know until we have teams of people actually doing high quality research on the intersection of all these topics. But we can maybe turn to the other topic area that I was considering, which is nuclear disarmament.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, just very briefly to start with. At first, I was interested in doing research on the particular intersection of zero knowledge proofs and nuclear disarmament, and there is some interesting stuff out there. It has nothing to do with Web3 and blockchains, though. Actually, it's actually there is a type of physical zero knowledge proof using physical cryptographic foils. That does sound very interesting, but not so much related to blockchains. I should take a little step back actually, and probably just for sake of listeners, just outline the three key areas or three challenges in nuclear disarmament. So the first is determining how many nuclear warheads a country has. The second is confirming the authenticity of actual the decommissioning process, when a country says, "Oh, we've just disarmed, we've just destroyed 100 nukes," how do you know they've destroyed actual nukes and not just props or models or some other kind of weapon or bomb? And the third problem is establishing confidence that countries don't have secret nuclear weapon production facilities. So this physical zero knowledge proof research that I just mentioned is in connection with the second of those. Physicists have found a very clever way to for a country to prove that it has disarmed an actual nuclear bomb without giving away any information about the insides of the nuclear bomb itself, which is typically highly classified information that you don't want like the other team to see. So I thought that was interesting, just because, of course, there's a ton of really good research being done on zero knowledge proofs in the Web3 world right now, and quite possibly some of that will go on to inform research and researchers in other areas. In this case, physicists, working on this topic of nuclear disarmament. So just relevant so far as there could be like positive spillover effects from the research that is happening in the Web3 space. But the area where that is a bit more closely related to Web3 itself is the idea of a global radiation monitoring network. So folks may have heard of Helium, this blockchain project that invites people to install IoT and 5G hotspots in their homes and workplaces and so on, and to create this like global mesh network for 5G and IoT. People then accessing the network are paying to do that, and which ultimately helps to support the token price. So that's how people actually running these hotspots are rewarded. So what if instead of a global network of hotspots, we had a global network of monitors? In this case, we'll be talking about radiation monitors. And I understand the tech is becoming quite sophisticated here. That some of these monitors are capable of detecting very, very small amounts of radiation, and this could potentially help with certainly the third of the three problems of nuclear disarmament that I mentioned. It could help to it could help to determine whether there were secret nuclear facilities, if nuclear materials being transported around. Potentially this decentralized network of radiation sensors would pick up some signal, and if that information was available on a blockchain for other countries to observe, they would have reason to think, hey, this country has some secret facility or isn't telling us the truth. So there's a chap called Lyndon Burford who co-founded an organization called the Path Collective that are doing some really good thinking around this topic, and from some of the stuff that Lyndon's written on this topic, I realized that discovered that there's a couple of projects that are relevant to this. There's one called safecast.org, which is trying to create this network of a decentralized network of radiation monitors. It has nothing to do with blockchains, but they have these kind of handheld radiation detectors that you can actually kind of obtain from them. So that part of the tech exists. And on the other side, there's a project called Planet Watch, which is blockchain based. It's currently not monitoring radiation; it's currently monitoring air quality. But all the component parts for something like this actually do already exist. So we may very well see a kind of helium for nuclear disarmament, some kind of like a decentralized network of radiation monitoring, and potentially air quality and other things pop up over the coming years.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. I mean, just to work backwards from first principles about why nuclear disarmament armament verification is hard, and why in a centralized regime it's hard is that these regimes often don't want to like let you go into their tech or like deeply inspect them, and so working around that by creating a decentralized network of helium style nodes that can just look for radiation in the environment around them. And now that you've taken me from just helium and distributed broadband or network access to air quality monitoring to radiation monitoring, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, distributed networks in which we all have nodes in which we're monitoring the environment around us could be a pattern or a scaffolding for many different types of decentralized coordination in the future that I've probably just never even thought of. That seems like there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so. A couple of things come to mind. Like, one is that this is a hot topic. It's unfortunately climate change is just one of our ecological concerns right now. But we are pushing ecological limits in a whole range of different ways, and in sometimes in quite an acute way. So I forget where exactly where this train crash happened recently in the United States that resulted in this spilling of huge amounts of toxic substances, and it seems like there was some evidence of a cover up there, or like that people were trying to kind of like keep it as quiet as possible. So that's exactly the kind of situation where a decentralized network of environmental monitors could really show its worth. And the other thing that's coming to mind is just I'm personally excited to start thinking about or to return to thinking about blockchains that don't applications of blockchain technology that don't necessarily have anything to do with tokens. And I mean, like tokens are often extremely useful, but I have some sense that we've become a little bit blinded by tokenomics.
I'll say
there's a whole bunch of like really cool stuff, just a kind of more basic layer of censorship resistance and zero knowledge proofs and so on that actually could be really useful and could form like a important part of the kind of regen refi movement going forwards.
Totally. I would say tokens are necessary but not sufficient in this future. So they're a building block, but I think there's an overemphasis on them because they're the things that you can measure. But yeah, totally, I agree.
Nice. Okay. Well, that gives you a summary of some of the kind of topics that we've been thinking about in Metacrisis DAO. So I imagine your listeners that are familiar with Web3, will see that this is a little bit different. Like you don't see that much in the Web3 space about bioterrorism or nuclear disarmament. But what did I say before? We're almost try to raise the ambitions of the Web3 space, and just say at the very least, like it isn't just about making as much money as possible, making number go up. Like there are some like really critical problems of humanity that potentially the Web3 community could really help to solve here. So and jump into Metacrisis.xyz or the wiki there. You'll be able to get up to speed with a whole class of interesting problems, many of which Daniel Schmachtenberger has spoken about at length.
Yeah, this reminds me of a shitpost that I posted a couple days that went somewhat viral. It was a holy man on a hill preaching to his disciples, and the holy man says, "I give you the power to solve climate change, AI alignment, and other coordination failures." And the audience is just like, "When token, when moon." It was one of my more successful shitposts in the last week, and I think it's a good criticism of
I saw that. I appreciated it, and it's actually exciting to me that to think that that in many ways we are so early, and to take the perspective that actually the future of this technology might have much less to do with tokens, or might involve like in using tokens in a very different way to how we're used to thinking about it at the moment. Someone else that seems to be doing some really good thinking around this is Chase Chapman. I think has been on the GreenPilled pod before. And also seems to kind of just be going back to first principles and saying hey, why are we here? And like, can we get more creative about how the fundamental technology underlying all of this work can be deployed?
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about this work. I'm glad to be ushering it forward, and I'm thankful to you, Stephen, for being a co-conspirator in that. I guess in summary for me, MetacrisisDAO.com is becoming forum.metacrisis.xyz and also wiki.metacrisis.xyz. There will be a quadratic funding round probably in the next month or two to reward people who are doing work around Daniel's prompts. We just did a couple great examples of the kind of analysis that could be useful there. And I hope that stimulates some ideas and discussion in the Metacrisis.xyz community from here. Anything I didn't ask that you want to say, Stephen?
I think we pretty much covered it, but just to say thank you, Kevin, for really engaging with Daniel's work. I've actually been familiar with Daniel's thinking for some years now, but before I really kind of entered the Web3 space, and it's just been incredibly exciting to me. And I know for a number of other people to see these worlds coming together. We're just at the beginning, but yeah, I feel like there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah, it's really exciting for me. I followed Daniel's work for years before I had the cojones to email him and pitch him on doing something together. But I just really hope that Web3 can fulfill this promise of being a coordination substrate for the world, and not only being that substrate, but being a regenerative one. So, being reliable, being number go up, but not just financial number up for the few, but like spiritual capital, intellectual capital, safety, increasing over time. And there's a lot of things to piece together, but I feel like each episode we do and each little nugget of intellectual capital that we generate is one piece of the puzzle. And hopefully over the next couple of years, the efforts will just compound if we can just stimulate the right movement. So that's what I'm here for. Does that bring up anything for you? I feel like we're opening up a whole other aperture as we're going to close the episode. But yeah, does that bring anything up for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we resonate with these perspectives, and
yeah.
And I see it's still a minority, but certainly growing part of the community. I could say especially since the bear market in a way, which kind of scared a whole bunch of people off. There's some those of us that are stuck around, are happy to talk about those different forms of capital that you mentioned, and to think of thinking in different ways about what the success of this technology and what this industry would look like beyond simply economic success. And I'm here for it.
Yeah, same. All right. Well, thanks for everything, Stephen. See you on Metacrisis.xyz.
See you there.